All right, if you're gearing up for your OCR A-level in religious studies, you know some topics are just absolutely massive. And today, we're diving into one of the big ones, Kantian ethics. So let's get straight to it. I want you to just forget about outcomes and feelings for a minute. Immanuel Kant wants us to think about this. What if morality is all about something else entirely? What if it's about a universal, rational duty? This is a huge shift in thinking, an approach we call deontological, and it really changes the game. So to get a real grip on this, we're going to break it down into four key areas. We'll start with the basics, Kant and duty. Then we'll get into the nuts and bolts of the moral law. After that, we'll bring in some important critics, and then we'll wrap it all up with the strengths and weaknesses. Honestly, think of this as the perfect structure for a top-grade essay covering all your knowledge and evaluation. Okay, first things first. To really understand Kant's whole system, you've got to start at the beginning, with the absolute foundations he built it on. So this is our guy, Immanuel Kant. He was a huge figure during the Enlightenment, a period in history that was all about championing human reason over traditional authority. And this is key for Kant. He believed that moral truths aren't just opinions. They are woven into the very fabric of the universe. And the best part? We can figure them out just by using our own minds. Right. Here's a key term you absolutely have to know: deontology. It basically means his ethics are all about duty. The word comes from the Greek deon, which literally means duty. It's what we call an absolutist theory. That just means it argues that some actions, like lying or killing, are just plain wrong in and of themselves, no matter what good you think might come from them. For Kant, the starting point for literally all of morality is the goodwill. And think about it. Courage, intelligence, even happiness. You can imagine situations where those things are actually bad, right? A courageous bank robber, a clever thief, a happy person doing terrible things. But for Kant, a good will, just the pure intention to do the right thing, is the only thing in the entire world that is good without any caveats. It's all about your motive. And Kant's own words here are just so powerful. He compares the goodwill to a jewel. You know, even if you try to do the right thing and it all goes wrong, the pure intention behind it, the goodwill, still shines. It has its own worth. For Kant, the consequences are completely irrelevant to how moral the act is. So what does this goodwill actually do? Well, it acts out of duty. And this is crucial. For Kant, acting from duty means doing the right thing because it's the right thing, not because it makes you feel warm and fuzzy inside. That's just what he calls inclination. And definitely not to get some kind of reward. You do it simply out of respect for the moral law itself. Okay, so act out of duty. Got it. But how on earth do we figure out what our duty actually is in any given situation? Well, this is where Kant gives us a practical tool, a kind of test called the categorical imperative. Now, Kant makes a really important distinction here. See, most of the rules we follow in life are what he calls hypothetical imperatives. They're basically if-then statements. If you want to get an A, then you should study. Simple. But moral commands, Kant says, are totally different. They're categorical imperatives. They are absolute. They don't say, if you want to be a good person. They just say, do this. Full stop. Like, do not kill. It's a command that applies to everyone, everywhere, no exceptions. So, how do we know if a rule is a genuine categorical imperative? Kant gives us 3 tests, or formulations. First up is the universal law. You have to ask yourself, can the rule behind my action, what Kant calls a maxim, be applied to everyone, everywhere, without the whole thing collapsing into a contradiction? For instance, if everyone made false promises, the whole idea of a promise would become meaningless. So, making false promises fails the test. Second, are you treating people as ends in themselves? This means you can't just use people as tools to get what you want. You have to respect their own inherent value. And finally, the kingdom of ends. Imagine you're a lawmaker in a perfect, rational society. Would your action be allowed as a law there? These 3 tests all work together to help us pinpoint our moral duty. Now, for this whole system to hang together, Kant says there are 3 things we just have to assume are true. We can't prove them, but without them, morality doesn't make sense. First, freedom. We have to have free will, otherwise how could we be held responsible for our actions? Second, immortality. Because the highest good, what he calls the summum bonum, where being good finally leads to being happy, doesn't always happen in this life, does it? So there must be an afterlife for it to happen. And that leads to the third. There must be a God to make sure justice is served and to bring about that summum bonum. Keep these postulates in your back pocket. They become really important when we start evaluating the theory. All right, so we've nailed the core knowledge. That's your AO1 sorted. Now it's time to shift gears into analysis and evaluation, your AO2. Because as powerful as Kant's theory is, it is definitely not without its problems. Let's dig into some of the major challenges. This right here, this is the absolute heart of Kant's ethics, the principle of universal law. But it's this very principle that has come under some serious fire. So let's look at a key thinker who really put it to the test. For your AO2, you need to be able to talk about specific scholars, and Philippa Foot is a fantastic one to use as a critic of Kant. She directly takes on his reliance on pure duty and this idea of a categorical imperative. So, Philippa Foot's critique really gets to the core of the problem. She argues, look, morality actually makes a lot more sense as a system of hypothetical imperatives. We do good things because we want good outcomes, like a just society. She asks, what's Kant's reason for why we should even bother being moral? His system tells us what to do, but not why. And I love this analogy she uses. She says, true virtue isn't about being a conscript who's forced to follow orders by duty, but a volunteer who actually desires and chooses to do good. In short, Kant's intense focus on pure reason seems to completely ignore a huge part of being human, our feelings, our desires, and our personal motivations. Okay, let's pull all of this together now into a final evaluation, looking at the key strengths and weaknesses that you can use to build a really solid argument in your exam. And hey, before we do that, here is a fantastic tip for exam success. Please do not fall into the trap of what some people call a Hermione plan, where you just try to list every single thing you know. It is so much better to pick 2 or 3 strong points on each side and really develop them in detail with examples. Quality over quantity is absolutely the key to hitting those top-level marks. So let's look at these points. On the plus side, Kant's ethics are rational, they're objective, and they're not swayed by unpredictable emotions. And the idea of treating people as ends in themselves, that is hugely influential and a cornerstone of modern human rights. But, on the other hand, the theory is famously rigid. I mean, take the classic example. A murderer is at your door asking where your friend is. According to Kant, you have a perfect duty not to lie. You just can't. This seems to force you into a position that completely ignores the horrifying consequences of telling the truth. And what happens when duties clash? Like a duty not to lie and a duty to protect life. Kant's system doesn't really give us a clear way to figure that out. And really, that brings us to the final question that you've got to wrestle with. Is Kant's system this clear, rational, timeless guide to our moral duties, one that protects the rights of every single person? Or is it an abstract, cold, and impractical ideal that just doesn't work in the messy reality of human life? That's the heart of the debate, and in your exam, the evaluation is all yours.